All right, thanks everyone. We'll make a start. Welcome one and all to the Nillumbik Shire Council Planning and Consultation Committee meeting tonight, the 8th of November 2022. Members of the public are advised that the meeting will be live streamed and recorded, and the live stream recording will be made available publicly on YouTube and Council's website. Nillumbik Shire Council respectfully acknowledges the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people as the traditional owners of the country on which Nillumbik is located, and we value the significance of the Wurundjeri people's history as essential to the unique character of the Shire. We pay tribute to all First Nations people living in Nillumbik, give respect to elders past, present and future, and extend that respect to all First Nations people. We respect the enduring strength of Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and acknowledge the ongoing impacts of past trauma and injustices from European invasion, massacres and genocide committed against First Nations people. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people hold a deep and ongoing connection to this place. We value the distinctive place of our First Nations people in both Nillumbik and Australia's identity, from their cultural heritage and the land, cultural heritage and care of the land and waterways, to their ongoing contributions in many fields, including academia, agriculture, art, economics, law, sport and politics. Next item on the agenda is apologies. We have one apology, and I look to Councillor Eyre for a motion.
Yes, that Council notes the apology of Councillor Natalie Duffy.
Thanks, Mayor Eyre.
Happy to second that.
Thanks, Councillor Payne. Any discussion on the apology? If there's no dissent, can I do that? No dissent, that's carried. Thank you. Unanimous. Any disclosures of conflicts of interest, councillors? If there are, please disclose it before that agenda item. There's only one agenda item tonight, so now would have been the time. We have the minutes to confirm. We're looking to confirm the minutes of the Planning Consultation Committee meeting held on Tuesday 11th of October.
Yes, I'll move a motion as per the papers.
Thanks, Councillor Regan. And the seconder?
Happy to second.
Thanks, Councillor Stockman. Any discussion? If there's no dissent, it's carried. Declare that carried. It's unanimous again. Okay, the one and only item on the agenda tonight really is the Draft Municipal Planning Strategy MPS Phase 3 Engagement Results and Update. We have a number of submitters. We've got 6 submissions in total to hear from tonight. I just want to read out, there's been a bit of discussion around, Council, around our governance rule around whether or not we can ask questions of people presenting on behalf of an organisation. And I'll read from the governance rule, just for your interest in terms of what it says, and then my interpretation is that we can ask you questions, but hear from it yourself. So it says a person can speak on their own behalf for up to 3 minutes. They may also speak on behalf of one organisation/company for a further period of up to 3 minutes. No person may speak on behalf of more than one person or organisation company unless Council or the Committee specifically resolves to allow them to do so. No person is permitted to speak on behalf of an absent submitter or organisation company unless he or she is authorised in writing by the absent submitter or by an authorised officer of the organisation/company to address Council on their behalf. Such document to be tabled by the Speaker. Any person so authorised may only read from a written statement prepared by the absent submitter. So the way I read that, the last sentence, I interpret that to be talking about an absent submitter, that you have to read from a written statement if you're speaking on behalf of an organisation. And the way I read it, where it says they may also speak on behalf of one organisation company for a period of up to 3 minutes, I don't see anything in our governance rule that prohibit a speaker speaking on behalf of an organisation, particularly if they're a committee member or president, for 3 minutes. Whether they choose to read from a statement or not, it's up to them. And I don't see anything in the governance rule that suggests that Council should not be able to ask you questions that deal specifically with that submission. So we shouldn't be going off track. But if Council wants some clarification on the submission, we should be able to ask the representative of that organisation. So that's how we'll run it tonight. Tonight we've got Greg Johnson, President, on behalf of Friends of Nillumbik. speaking. So we will be able to ask you questions. Well, it's just 3 because you've only registered as speaking on behalf of the organisation. Yeah. So you've got 3 minutes, and if we're going to ask you questions, it's actually we're asking the Friends of Nillumbik. Yeah. Thanks, Greg.
Sorry? Oh. We have a particular interest in what the MPS says about the green wedge, the natural environment and climate change. Context. Bushfires should be mentioned in the context of other serious risks such as climate change and biodiversity decline. The third paragraph needs to include reference to Nillumbik being originally set up to be the conservation shire with the green wedge as its strategic focus. Vision. Much of the wording in the draft vision is unsuitable because it's at odds with the guidelines which say that it should relate to land use and development issues capable of being influenced by the planning scheme, and I'm not sure how improving livability, putting the community at the heart of the shire and other concepts really relate much to the planning scheme. So I have an issue with that. However, can continue on the vision. We believe the vision statement must incorporate the 3 main priorities the community identified in this original survey, Our People, Our Place, Our Future. That is, preservation of the green wedge, protection of the environment and biodiversity, action on climate change. Protection of the environment and biodiversity must be a separate dot point unconnected to identity because its significance goes far beyond identity. And references to climate emergency should be included in the vision statement. The statement should be adjusted to reflect other serious risks to the natural environment, such as loss of biodiversity, loss of vegetation, and overdevelopment of our green wedge. Strategic directions. The third paragraph under settlement in the Nillumbik green wedge describes the green wedge as containing sites of environmental and landscape significance and a mix of conservation, agricultural and residential uses. Residential uses should be changed to scattered dwellings because residential use is not encouraged or supported in the green wedge. Containing sites of environmental and landscape significance, quote, minimises the environmental value of the green wedge. All of the green wedge is environmentally significant, for example, wildlife corridors, habitat links, etc. We would wish a 5th dot point to be added under strategic directions, and that would be develop a small lot strategy to minimise overdevelopment in the green wedge, to include a minimum lot size for development, a building envelope requirement and need for land management plans. The context being that there are about 700 undersized lots susceptible to development applications in our green wedge, and we're looking at the loss of a green wedge. There's a risk of it becoming a sort of a low density residential area. Continuing on very quickly, environmental landscapes and values, protection of biodiversity, strategic directions. First 2 dot points. It's not just areas of environmental significance that need to be protected and enhanced. Most of the rural area is zoned for conservation and needs to be protected and enhanced. All remnant vegetation should be protected and enhanced, not just significant remnant vegetation. Added dot point. Maintain and enhance the diversity of indigenous flora and fauna, habitats and species, and achieve a net gain in the quantity and quality of native vegetation.
Thanks, Greg. You're out of time.
Out of time? Okay.
But thanks very much. Has Council got a copy of your written submission?
No, it's scrappy handwriting. I could forward it on once I've tidied it up.
Oh, or even just feel free to scan it and forward it on via email.
Will do.
Any questions of Greg, councillors?
I've just got one question. 700 lots at potential risk of development outside the urban growth boundary. Is that what you're saying?
Outside, that's as I understand it. I haven't done the research myself, but I certainly understood that there are about 700 undersized lots, meaning less than 8 hectares.
Right.
So in various sizes. Some are quite small.
Okay.
Some are under an acre, less. So that's a ticking time bomb in lots of ways.
Are they situated in any particular part of the Shire or just scattered throughout? Old legacy subdivisions?
There would need to be some strategic work done on where they are. I understand a lot of them are scattered. Some might be grouped together, like there was the old Smiths gully area, which that had a grouping of small undersized lots, and we managed to put a restructure overlay on that to limit the development potential.
Okay.
But it is a serious strategic problem.
Okay. Thanks for that.
Any other questions, councillors? Thanks very much, Greg. Next we have Carlotta Quinlan, and Carlotta's speaking on behalf of Eltham Community Action Group, and then following that, Carlotta will speak on behalf of herself. But first we have ECAG.
Thank you. Thank you. Would it be okay if I did them separately, as in someone in between, to get the head in another space? Well, I'll do Eltham Community Action Group first then. Excuse me. As a dense document, it's impossible to even scratch the surface in 3 minutes. I read through what we had submitted and highlighted a few things, but 3 minutes, you just couldn't do it. So I'll be fairly general. As a high-level document providing the overarching strategies for the major land use and development matters affecting the Shire, the municipal planning scheme needs to be extremely carefully worded and perfectly explicit in its stated intent. The wording must be clear, succinct and absolutely unambiguous, otherwise it lays itself open to interpretation or misinterpretation. As covering overarching strategies, it should therefore be completed before any lower level strategies are begun. For instance, is the neighbourhood character statement in the MPS carried through to the neighbourhood character strategy in process? Explicit wording, for example, facilitate. Facilitate from various dictionaries means to make easier or more likely to happen. To facilitate increased diversity and amount of housing in the major activity centres means, one assumes, to make it easier and more likely to happen. This implies changes to the planning scheme, neighbourhood character and significant landscape overlay statements, as apartment buildings, townhouses and smaller dwellings are already permitted. What other type of development is envisaged and how will this be made easier? The section on context, recognition of the local Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, and that Nillumbik is a green wedge shire with conservation at its strategic focus, should be given higher placement in the context statement. The vision section should include the 3 top priorities listed in the Nillumbik community vision. 1, the preservation of the green wedge. 2, protection of our environment and biodiversity. And 3, local action on climate change. Nillumbik contains an urban growth boundary and is not in a growth corridor as defined by the Victorian Planning Authority. Residents, councillors and planning officers should have this in front and centre of minds when considering the wording of this MPS. The Shire was set up to be a conservation area, not an area that facilitates development. The community values the treed landscape. Subdivision in urban and rural areas is a continuing threat to the environmental importance of the Shire. Ever-increasing growth is not sustainable. With regard to activity centres, new housing in the centres should be at a minimum permitted height and should be required to provide substantial landscaping, including trees. The gateway is not widely known by that name, so should be marked on public documents, for example, tourism maps. The treed entrance has been recognised as a focus for coming home, even by people not living close.
And Carlotta, you're at a time, but if you wanted to scan that and send it through to us, we'll be able to read the whole document.
Well, it's what you had originally.
Okay.
And I've just tried to pick out bits, but I haven't done that successfully either. So,
yeah.
right.
Well, it's up to you. Any questions of ECAG, councillors? No. If you're ready to, you want to come back later on? Yep. Okay. So next we have Khan Frankie, President of the Green Wedge Protection Group, speaking on behalf of the Green Wedge Protection Group. Thank you, Khan.
The Green Wedge Protection Group acknowledge the importance of the MPS and the influence it will have on the future direction of our unique shire. The Green Wedge Protection Group unashamedly adhere to the vision that created Nillumbik as a conservation shire with the Green Wedge as its strategic focus. Consideration for both the urban and Green Wedge areas of the shire reflect this focus in the submissions before you. We also acknowledge that the preparation of the MPS must meet stringent guidelines, making the task of council officers who must distil the key components of each submission challenging. We do not apologise for our lengthy submission of 16 pages. It contains explanation of important elements that should be reflected in our MPS, supporting and implementing the vision articulated in the creation of Nillumbik. 10 years ago, the world stood at a crossroads of climate change. Sadly, the wrong turn was taken. Today, COP27 is declaring impending doom and disaster if the nettle is not grasped. Australia has been missing in action. Federal and state reviews on biodiversity loss are damning. Nillumbik, the Green Wedge Shire, has also dropped the ball. The new MPS offers the opportunity to weave into the very fabric of life in Nillumbik future sustainability, environmental enhancement, improved social and community outcomes through meeting the goal laid down at the creation of Nillumbik. It is an obligation that is strongly supported by the community. Since Nillumbik's inception, the community has consistently advocated for the planning ideals embodied in the planning scheme to protect and improve our Green Wedge. Every aspect of life in Nillumbik and on Earth relies on nature. Maintaining biodiversity is at the forefront. Currently, bushland and agricultural land within Nillumbik are being impacted by weed infestations. Bone seed is taking over Diamond Creek, blackberries are again rampaging across farmland and popping up throughout our bushland. Patterson's curse dominates hilltops in Panton Hill and Chapel Lane. St John's wort is becoming widespread. Small glimpse of where Nillumbik has relaxed in looking after the environment. Incremental removal of trees and understory is happening daily. Our submission, which hopefully everybody's read, nod, covers a lot of things. And so, Green Wedge, Objective 4, rural residential land use. We do have to get away from calling RCZ land rural residential land use. It's dwellings. There are dwellings going in there. It is not a rural residential land use. It doesn't come up in the uses within the Green Wedge zones. We have to recognise the preservation of Green Wedge protection and biodiversity and the action on climate change. Top priority for Nillumbik community, consistent with finding of our people, our place, our future. Key objective 3 is we've got to acknowledge that the concept behind Green Wedges was to remove urban expectation from the rural areas. Strategic planning for local townships should accommodate the essential service and community facilities as required.
And we're out of time, Carl. Sorry.
I've got 15 pages to go, Pete.
Scan them and send them through.
I think you've
we'd
already
be pleased
got
that
them, mate,
we'll send them through again, or any additions. Feel free to send it through. But any questions of councillors? But look, thanks for all your work. Certainly, it's a very thorough submission, and yeah, we haven't made a decision yet, but we're taking submissions, and
I look forward to the final document.
Yep.
It'll be interesting. Thank you. Righto, everyone.
Thank you. Did you want to wait till last, Carlotta, or did you? I'm not sure. Is Lauren Widdop here? Lauren's not here. Frank Perry? It's up to you. Who wants to go first? Yep. Okay, come Frank. So Frank Perry is next to the microphone. Push the button on the right, the one with the...
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. Look, I understand everything that's been mentioned here today. I'm not relating to anything specific in relation to elements of the plan, other than I agree, of course, biodiversity, protection of the environment, global warming, all of those things are central to Eltham and Nillumbik. I'm an Eltham lover, but to Nillumbik in particular, that's why we live here. We love that place, and that needs to be preserved. So there's nothing in contradiction to what I've heard thus far. But we're not immune to things like population growth. The very need for the Green Wedge Shire is globally important, not just locally important, and we are part of Australia and the global community, and population growth and shortage of housing is still an issue that we have to contend with. We are not living in a bubble in Nillumbik. And so as a consequence, we're not going to be able to remove all development, reasonable development, and have people that come in to want to live here. It's not just protecting me, 15 years worth of living here, and others. We need to welcome others into this community. Having said that, I agree with all those protections. They're absolutely mandatory, that we need to protect this environment. In terms of the planning overlays, I've got a vested interest in Reynolds Road in particular, which is why I'm here. There are some elements in the plan that suggest that we are very strict and we don't sort of encroach on sort of any kind of overlays. They have to be, they have to be maintained. I'm in a low residential zone at the moment, and it's surrounded by residential zones toward on Reynolds Road toward Main Road, Valonia Road across the area there, and plus a bit further down on Nyora Avenue as well. So I'm surrounded by a residential zone. I agree that Nillumbik is a huge environment and we need to protect it, but what I'm suggesting here is that any kind of planning overlays or any decisions made by this planning strategy doesn't make it impossible for people to maybe consider, not necessarily making it a residential zone, but certainly being in line with Victorian planning, which is 4,000 square metres in a residential zone, whereas Nillumbik has it as 2,000. And so that, sorry, excuse me, it's the other way around. Under Victorian planning, I believe it's 2,000 square metres as a minimum allotment for a low residential zone, whereas Nillumbik, if I'm not mistaken, is 4,000. So I suppose in short, I want to say is that in any decision that is made, that we consider the fact that, yes, it wouldn't be improper, in my opinion, to have a bit of reasonable subdivision and development, which doesn't need to contradict or any of the great statements made by the people I've heard before, because I agree with them fully. And if you would consider Reynolds Road, some people suggest that you can't build without there being transport infrastructure, but of course good planning means you consider, where is that transport infrastructure? Can we reroute the bus that goes down the street beforehand? And Reynolds Road is becoming, as you may well know, many of you, it's
sorry, Frank, time's gone away from us, but yeah,
oh,
your
sorry
time's
about
up.
that.
No worries. Thank you, Ruth,
I
very
thought I was
much.
lecturing my sons for a second there.
Just hold on, I'll see if there's any questions from council. Any questions, councillors? No, but thanks very much for coming along, Frank.
Thank you.
Thanks for your
Thanks very
submission.
much for listening.
Carlotta, to round out the night. Yeah, there were 6 in total, and Laurie didn't appear.
Oh, sorry. Yes, well, I concur with the all the comments that have been made about the wider Green Wedge, because I live in Eltham and am more involved with the Eltham Community Action Group. My concerns, or not necessarily concerns, but what I'm spending the time on to do with Eltham. Sort of to continue the wording, facilitate. There's facilitate an expansion in the range of commercial and community services available in the major activity centres. You wonder how is council going to make that easier? Facilitate increased diversity and amount of housing in the major activity centres. Again, it's already there, surely, so what is actually meant by this, and how is it going to be read or interpreted in other areas of government? Sorry, I left it behind. No, it's there. For further strategic work, much of the further strategic work is aimed at development, land for various types of residential development, development in gateways, signage, reviewing medium density housing policy, housing strategy. None of these pieces of work which council will identify and review give any indication of being to protect or preserve the existing situation or even enhance it. This emphasis seems to be that this planning strategy must be to develop. The actions should be rethought and reworded so that development in the above areas is not the aim or outcome. The municipal planning strategy covers many areas, all of which are important. But as I said, for brevity, I have spoken mainly about Eltham. Housing. It should be stressed that Nillumbik is not under pressure to grow significantly, and the projected number of extra dwellings required within the next decade or so, see the government figures made available by Council during the Housing Strategy Survey, do not necessitate major changes in Nillumbik's planning scheme or housing policy. It concerns me the amount of strategic work that is still needed for this policy and other strategies that are in the pipeline, knowing that the strategic planning department of Nillumbik has been decimated in the last few weeks for a variety of reasons. Obviously, it is of concern that there is so much work to be done with so little people to do it. My concern is for the health, mental and physical, of the planners who the pressure is going to be put on, and also for the standard of the strategies that are going to come out of any sort of forced, pressured work to get this done.
Yeah, and time's up now,
time.
Carlotta. Thank you.
Thanks.
Just hang there for a sec. Any questions of Carlotta, councillors? No, thanks very much, Carlotta. And thanks to all the submitters tonight. Really appreciate your time and effort, not only making your written submissions and the submissions on behalf of your organisations, but personal ones as well. And it does actually help to get the point across when people do attend these meetings and make personal submissions. So really appreciate your efforts. So there's more work to be done here, of course. We knew that that would be an inevitable result of doing public consultation, but I'll look for a motion. Councillor Antran.
Yes, I'd like to move that the committee, acting under delegation from Council, 1, notes the public responses as outlined in this report to the Phase 3 engagement for the draft municipal planning strategy project. 2, resolves that the confidential, unredacted copies of written submissions and survey responses to Phase 3 public engagement of the draft MPS at attachments 1 and 2 remain confidential on the grounds specified in the definition of confidential information in Section 3(1)(f) of the Local Government Act 2020. 3, writes to all respondents to the public engagement to express Council's gratitude for their contribution and to advise them of the committee's resolution and the next steps in the project. And 4, notes officers will be bringing a final draft of the MPS to a council meeting in early to mid-2023 to seek adoption and council's approval to seek authorisation from the Minister for Planning to prepare and exhibit a planning scheme amendment pursuant to Section 8A of the Planning and Environment Act 1987 to the Nillumbik planning scheme to insert the new MPS.
Thank you, Councillor Antran. Do we have a seconder?
Happy to second that.
Thanks, Councillor Payne, and back to you, Councillor Antran.
Yes, thank you. And look, I'd also like to thank all the speakers who came in today. I agree with Councillor Perkins that it really does help to have you here speaking to your submissions. I certainly read them all and need to have a more thorough read, I think, a second time through. They were very valuable and I think pointed out a number of things that need to be tweaked. I do think the document that we've got now is very good. I think it's a very good start, but clearly from the submissions that we've got, there is some further work to be done. And I really have nothing but admiration for our strategic planning team, who have got a huge job on their hands, not just with the municipal planning strategy, but with all the other strategies they're working on at the moment. And it is very difficult to attract good strategic planners these days. They cost a lot of money, so it's it is a lot of work to get this done, and I think the team is doing an amazing job with it. I think what really shone through in the feedback that we got today was the love that our community has for the Green Wedge, and not just the areas of Nillumbik that are technically Green Wedge, but also those urban areas outside of the Green Wedge zones, which people there still consider themselves to be part of the Green Wedge Shire, because they have that leafy neighbourhood and they're right on the doorstep of some really beautiful natural environment and some amazing areas, and I think that's what's so special about Nillumbik. So that really shone through there in the submissions. I think as a council we have a duty to protect that. It's not about putting an end to all development. There will always be development in Nillumbik and everywhere else, but we are not a growth area. There are growth areas which have been outlined by the state government around the city, and those areas are where the majority of housing is going in, especially in some of those greenfield sites. Nillumbik is not listed as a growth area. We do need to grow. We do need to allow new development to come in, but in order to protect what we've got here, it has to be managed appropriately to make sure that that we don't lose what we've got, because it really is incredibly special. I think there were some good points raised about the wording around the rural conservation zone and residential uses within that, and that shone through in a number of the submissions there. And the fact that the rural conservation zone is not a rural residential zone, it's rural conservation, and that is the primary use of that zone, and residential uses should be secondary to that rural use. Not to say that you can't live there, just that it has to be aligned with the environmental values of that area. We are very restricted with this document, very strict word limit. I think some university assignments have had longer word limits than that, and people still struggle to stick to them, and I think possibly I can't remember how many pages Khan had in his submission, but it might be longer than the MPS that we've got. So that's just to give an idea of how short this thing is. It's very high level. It can't change zoning. It can't change rules within the planning scheme. But what it can do is set an overarching vision, and that vision guides future amendments to the planning scheme. It guides decisions in VCAT where there's an ambiguity within a zone about the objectives behind that zone, and it can actually have some real influence on the VCAT member who's deciding that, who may look at the MPS and go, oh, well, you know, the MPS talks about having rural landscapes, having high-value biodiversity, having agricultural land, and that might be something that swings the member one way or the other. So it really is a key document. Unlike the old municipal strategic statement, which this is replacing, this one is much more succinct, much more clear, and I think it will mean a lot more to members at VCAT, whereas the old municipal strategic statement was a lot more verbose and often overlooked at VCAT in a way that we expect the MPS will not be. So that's really good news, and I think it's really positive that we're moving to this new format for the planning scheme. But it does involve a lot of work, and it involves a lot of hard decisions in what do we cut out, because we had a huge document there that with a lot of stuff in there that we really liked, and we've had to cut a lot of that out to get it back to 5,000 words. And anything we want to add now, we'll be cutting stuff out because we've almost reached the word limit. But what we can do is we can put maps in, we can change maps. Maps don't add to the words, to the word count. So I think we ought to consider some more maps. I think one map that really should be in there is the outcome of the Future of Agricultural Land Review, just to show what our land is actually capable of growing here in Nillumbik, and just to show that we do have agricultural potential. And when you have lots in the rural conservation zone, there's not a good reason to get rid of, to develop them when they are viable for agriculture. I've run out of time. I'd just like to thank all the speakers again and thank the officers for the work they've done on this and the work that they're yet to do. Thank you.
Thanks. I've just been advised that Laurie, you've arrived, but yeah, unfortunately we've concluded the verbal submissions, and we've moved the motion, seconded a motion, we've entered debate, so we can't actually go back now. But thanks for making the effort. We're halfway through debate. We've just had the mover, Councillor Amtran, speak for 5 minutes, and now I'll look to Councillor Payne, if you want to say.
Yes, I won't keep anyone here long. Just to say thank you for the submissions. We do hear what you're saying about the importance of the green wedge. We know that we are part of a green wedge shire, and we know that part of the shire is also part of Metro Melbourne, and we have to balance those needs, and sometimes overlapping and colliding needs there. We know it's a low growth area, and we don't intend for anything to change dramatically at all. The revelation that there could be 700 at-risk lots is something that we need to think about and look at. But thank you for the submission and also the work that our stat planning team has done in compressing it into the 5,000 word limit, which is quite restrictive. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Councillor Payne. I've just had some advice from our governance officer that there is the option for a councillor to put up a procedural motion to suspend standing orders momentarily, well, for 3 minutes anyway, to allow Laurie to speak, given that she's made the effort to come along, although a little bit late. So we need to move her to suspend standing orders. Mayor Eyre, let's move that, and Councillor Ramcharan. Is there any discussion on that?
Happy to support that.
Okay, yep, we'll if there's no dissent, I'll take that as carried, and we'll suspend standing orders and give Laurie the opportunity to speak. So please come forward.
I would like to see much stronger and clearer wording used in their MPS, so that developments that get knocked back at the planning stages by Nillumbik Council are less likely to be approved when reviewed at VCAT. The area I live in is classified as Bush Residential 2. The wording used is characterised by predominantly 1 to 2 storey dwellings. This does not rule out there being 3-storey dwellings in the area already. The wording is not specific enough and could lead to decision makers assuming there are already 3-storey dwellings in the area and approving developments that are not suitable for our neighbourhood. There is no mention of setbacks from the road in the strategy. For developments, I believe road setbacks should be equal to or greater than that of existing dwellings in the area. Under the headings of garden and landscaping, it says the site area covered by buildings should not exceed 40%. This seems like a weak statement. It should not exceed 40%, but it could. This needs to be strengthened to protect our neighbourhood from further inappropriate developments. It is mentioned under siting and setbacks that if more than one dwelling is proposed, provide sufficient separation between each dwelling to allow for planting of medium indigenous, native trees and understory vegetation. Bushfire risk needs to be taken into account. Many parts of Nillumbik, such as Eltham and Warrandyte, have been highlighted as extremely high bushfire risk after the fires of 2009, with that risk set to worsen significantly with our climate changing. A clear and very present danger for our local communities is the risk of large-scale life and property loss from house-to-house ignition, known as urban conflagration. This type of fire raises whole townships in a domino effect. Embers ignite one home and the burning home ignites any other home within 10 metres of it. This type of fire was responsible for the loss of houses and life in Marysville in 2009. This type of fire also ignited one home per minute in the 2018 Californian Camp Fire that killed 91 people and destroyed 18,800 buildings. The US has a mandatory evacuation policy and its highway infrastructure can quickly evacuate people, yet lives were still lost. A fire of this type would be catastrophic in Nillumbik, like it was in Marysville, with limited evacuation routes, only 2 river crossings that are congested on a normal day, and a large number of houses that are not built to more recent bushfire standards. I would like to see the risks of urban conflagration in our local area addressed by Nillumbik Council. Climate change is responsible for bigger and more powerful storms, more dry lightning strikes, and stronger winds that will make hot and dry conditions in Nillumbik very dangerous. New developments should not be allowed within 10 metres of any existing dwellings unless both the new and old dwellings are built to the highest bushfire standards. The risks are too great for our community members if current planning practices don't change. Anthony Albanese said recently that governments couldn't keep allowing homes to be built in harm's way as climate change fuelled an increase in natural disasters. And I think these changes need to start at a local government level. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Laurie. Just stay there for a sec. There might be some one or more questions from councillors, if you wouldn't mind answering a question from Councillor Stockman.
Yeah, hi Laurie. Just whereabouts, or can I ask where you live?
Off of Leanne Drive.
In Eltham?
Eltham.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions? Thanks very much for making the effort.
Thank you.
Good on you. Now I need to, for the procedural motion, I need to move in a second to resume standing orders. So, Mayor Eyre, and
Yep, happy to move that.
seconded by Councillor Ramcharan. There's no dissent. It's carried, unanimous. And we're back into debate. We've heard from the mover and seconder. Any other councillor wishing to speak to the motion?
Yes, just
Councillor.
really quickly. Thank you, Chair. I just really want to make sure that we have an MPS that's meaningful, relevant and gives clear direction, especially to VCAT. We want it to be a representative of Nillumbik, not a general MPS, but something that represents our community here. So I want to say thank you to those that came in tonight to share your thoughts, and to those who have spent the time also submitting. It will all help to formulate the final version. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Eyre. Any other council wishing to speak? Look, I'll just wrap it up just by thanking the submitters again. I think you're dedicated campaigners. You know what works best. You know how to hit the mark with council and with councillors, and that's by making a written submission, not necessarily answering the tick the box yes no questions, and perhaps not even identifying yourself on the computer. It is better to write a written submission and come and present that submission. We've got no choice but to hear it. So I think your work will pay off. We'll make sure it does. And if there's anything else that you wanted to add that wasn't in our bundle, please feel free to do that, because council will always hear from people even late submissions. So I'd just like to just thank you for your work. Officers have done a great job. There's a lot more work to be done. There will be tweaks. I agree with Councillor Amtran. It's a good start, but it is a start, and we'll take on board a lot of what's been said tonight and through the submissions, and make what we feel are the necessary changes. So that being said, there's no right of reply. I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? And the motion's carried. It is unanimous. I don't think there's any other business. There's no supplementary and urgent business. There's no confidential reports. And I can close the meeting at 7:41. Thanks one and all. Good night.